Welcome to Void of Fears, where the line between reality and nightmares blur with every tale. What you're about to hear has happened to someone, somewhere, perhaps even someone just like you. Our community continues to grow, and now we're reaching for 100,000 subscribers. If these glimpses into the unknown call to you, please consider subscribing. Now let's dive into tonight's story. The monitoring room at Titan Deep Space Array hummed with the quiet efficiency of another routine night shift. Dr. Kate Thompson adjusted her position in the operator's chair, watching streams of data flow across her screens as automated sensors swept the void beyond Neptune's orbit. The work was methodical, peaceful even, tracking debris fields, cataloguing asteroid movements, updating navigation charts for the commercial shipping lanes that connected the outer colonies to Earth. She'd been working the night shift for 3 years now, ever since her divorce had left her seeking solitude in the depths of space. The isolation suited her. Out here, 47 astronomical units from Earth, the only sounds were the gentle hum of life support systems and the occasional ping of sensor data. No arguments, no broken promises, no painful reminders of a life that had fallen apart. Just her, the stars, and the endless ocean of space. Tonight felt different somehow. The sensors were picking up unusual gravitational fluctuations near the edge of their detection range, subtle distortions in space-time that made her instruments flicker with uncertainty. She'd run 3 diagnostic checks, but the equipment was functioning perfectly. Something was out there, moving through the dark between the stars. Then every alarm in the facility exploded to life at once. The monitoring room plunged into absolute darkness as the main power grid overloaded, emergency lighting kicking in to bathe everything in hellish, red illumination. Kate's workstation erupted in a cascade of critical warnings, each reading more impossible than the last. Proximity alarms screamed warnings about massive objects approaching at relativistic speeds. Gravitational sensors registered readings that violated every known law of physics, detecting spatial distortions that should have torn apart anything within a 1,000-kilometer radius. The massive displacement detectors, designed to spot asteroids the size of city blocks from millions of kilometers away, were detecting something approaching at near light speed. Something that was actively decelerating in ways that should have been impossible. Kate felt her vision blur as gravitational waves washed over the station in successive pulses. Blood began trickling from her nose as the very fabric of space around Titan Station warped and twisted under forces that her mind couldn't comprehend. Through the reinforced observation windows, she could see the stars themselves bending out of position, their ancient light stretching into impossible spirals that hurt to look at directly. Her hands moved frantically across the control interfaces, pulling up long-range sensor data and running the approaching object's energy signature through the station's comprehensive archives. The readings were unlike anything in their databases, a fusion signature that predated modern reactor technology, hull composition that matched no known alloys, and most disturbing of all, electromagnetic emanations that resembled human brainwave patterns amplified to impossible intensity. "What the hell?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the continuing alarms. The computer systems crashed, restarted, crashed again. Each time the screens flickered back to life, they displayed fragments of data that made no sense. Crew manifests from centuries past. Mission profiles for expeditions that should have been long forgotten. Technical specifications for ships that had vanished into the dark. On the 3rd restart attempt, a single line of text appeared on her primary monitor, glowing like a death sentence in the red emergency lighting. UES Nemesis, lost 2087, crew 12 souls. Kate felt the blood turn to ice water in her veins. The Nemesis. Every student of space exploration knew that name, whispered in the same reverent tones reserved for the Challenger, the Columbia, and the other vessels that had carried human dreams into the unknown only to disappear forever. The Nemesis had been humanity's first serious attempt at faster-than-light travel, launched 300 years ago during the early days of the colonial expansion. Equipped with an experimental quantum drive system and crewed by 12 of Earth's brightest scientific minds, the ship had been sent to investigate mysterious, dark matter concentrations near Alpha Centauri. The mission was supposed to last 18 months, a journey to the edge of known space, a brief survey of the anomalous readings, and a triumphant return to Earth with data that would revolutionize human understanding of the cosmos. Instead, the ship had simply vanished. 6 months into the mission, all contact had ceased. Search and rescue operations had found nothing. No debris, no distress signals, no trace that the Nemesis had ever existed beyond the orbit of Pluto. The 12 crew members had been declared lost with all hands, their names added to the long list of explorers who had paid the ultimate price for humanity's reach towards the stars. And now, 3 centuries later, something was approaching, Titan Station with the Nemesis's energy signature. Static burst from Kate's communications array, harsh and grating in the otherwise sterile environment. The white noise resolved gradually into something that might have been a human voice, though it was distorted by interference and distance until it sounded more like an echo from the bottom of an ocean. "Control, this is Captain. We're coming home. We found something in the dark. Something that's been waiting. God help us, we found." The transmission cut to white noise, then to something infinitely worse. Screaming. 12 distinct voices crying out in agony, but their screams were perfectly synchronized, harmonized in ways that human vocal cords should never be able to achieve. The sound carried undertones of terror and ecstasy, as if the crew of the Nemesis were simultaneously experiencing the worst torture and the most transcendent joy imaginable. Kate slammed her palm down on the emergency alert panel, sending klaxons wailing throughout every section of Titan Station. The facility came alive with activity as emergency protocols kicked in automatically. Blast doors sealed critical sections, backup power systems engaged, and the emergency response team began assembling in the primary docking bay. Within 10 minutes, the response team had gathered for briefing. Commander Jack Stone arrived first, a career military officer with 30 years of deep space experience etched into the weathered lines of his face. He'd served on patrol vessels during the Martian Independence War and commanded rescue operations during the Europa colony disaster. If anyone could handle a crisis, it was Stone. Dr. Amy Bell, the station's chief xenobiologist, arrived next, her scientific instruments already humming with activity as she began taking atmospheric readings. She'd spent 15 years studying alien microorganisms discovered in the ice caves of Enceladus and had published groundbreaking research on the possibility of silicon-based life forms. Her expertise in exotic biology made her invaluable for any situation involving unknown life forms. Tom Brooks, their senior engineer, entered the briefing room carrying a portable analysis unit that was already processing data from the station's sensor array. He'd designed propulsion systems for the latest generation of deep space exploration vessels and had an intuitive understanding of exotic physics that bordered on supernatural. If the approaching vessel was using technology beyond current human understanding, Tom would be their best hope of comprehending it. Dr. Lisa Kim, the chief medical officer, completed the team. Her background in space medicine and emergency trauma care had saved dozens of lives during her career, but her real value lay in her research into the psychological effects of deep space isolation. If the crew of the Nemesis had survived 3 centuries in the void, their mental state would be unlike anything previously documented. "What are we looking at, Thompson?" Commander Stone demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos of continuing alarms. Kate pulled up the sensor data on the main briefing screen, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the tremor of fear that ran through her fingers. "Sir, it's the UES Nemesis. the exploration vessel that went missing 300 years ago during the Alpha Centauri expedition. It's approaching our position at roughly 90% light speed, but it's decelerating in ways that violate known physics. She highlighted the gravitational readings on the display. The ship is generating massive spatial distortions, creating a kind of bubble of warped space-time around itself, but that's not the strangest part. Dr. Bell studied the data streaming across her tablet, her expression growing more concerned with each passing second. These atmospheric readings are completely off the charts. The ship is venting some kind of organic compounds into space, complex molecular structures that I've never seen before. They're too sophisticated to be natural, but they don't match any known synthetic compounds either. It's almost like they're alive. Tom Brooks looked up from his engineering console, his face pale under the emergency lighting. "Commander, the gravitational distortions around that ship are creating a kind of tractor effect. Our station isn't just monitoring the Nemesis's approach, we're being pulled toward it. The station's orbital thrusters are firing automatically to compensate, but they're not powerful enough to break free from whatever force that ship is generating." Commander Stone absorbed this information with the calm efficiency of a man who had faced impossible situations before. "How long until contact?" "A current rate of approach, approximately 47 minutes, Kate replied, her voice steady despite the growing dread in her chest. "Survival probability for the crew if they've been in space for 3 centuries. Dr. Kim consulted her medical database, though they all knew the answer. 0, sir. Human physiology cannot survive extended exposure to cosmic radiation and 0 gravity for more than a few years, even with the best life support systems. Whatever's aboard that ship, it's not human anymore. Not in any biological sense." Before Commander Stone could respond, every screen in the briefing room flickered and went dark. When they came back online, they all displayed the same message in flowing, organic script that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. "We are coming home to tend the infinite garden." The words seemed to move on the screens, shifting and breathing like living things. As they watched, the letters began to change, rearranging themselves into new patterns that hurt to look at directly. Kate felt her voice echo strangely as she spoke, as if her words were travelling through water instead of air. "Sir, I don't think this is a rescue mission. I think we're being collected." The docking sequence that followed was a nightmare of twisted physics and violated engineering principles. Titan Station groaned and screamed as invisible forces yanked it toward the approaching vessel, the station's superstructure flexing beyond its design tolerances. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as atmospheric pressure fluctuated wildly throughout the facility. Through the observation ports, they watched the Nemesis grow larger and larger in their field of view. What they saw defied every expectation they'd had about the missing ship. The vessel that approached them was both the Nemesis and something entirely alien. The basic hull configuration remained recognizable. The elongated command section, the massive engine nacelles, the distinctive sensor arrays that had once been humanity's most advanced deep space exploration technology, but the ship had been fundamentally transformed. What had once been sleek metal hull plating was now something that resembled living tissue. The surface of the ship pulsed with a slow, rhythmic motion like the breathing of some massive creature. Veins of bioluminescent light ran along the hull in patterns that followed no engineering blueprint, carrying something that looked like glowing fluid through organic conduits that had grown over and through the original structure. Sections of the ship that should have been solid metal appeared to be translucent, revealing internal spaces that moved and shifted like the organs of a vast organism. Other areas had developed growths that resembled nothing so much as flowering plants, blooming with petals that reflected starlight in colours that had no names. "My God," Dr. Bell whispered, her scientific instruments going haywire as they tried to analyse what they were seeing. It's not just alive, it's been completely integrated with some kind of biological matrix. The ship and whatever organism has colonized it have become a single entity. The Nemesis's docking bay opened like a mouth, revealing an interior that glowed with soft, phosphorescent light. What should have been a sterile mechanical environment now resembled the inside of some enormous flower. Tendrils extended from the opening, reaching across the void toward Titan Station's airlock with purposeful intelligence. The tendrils made contact with their station, and Kate felt the entire structure shudder as the organic appendages began to interface with their mechanical systems. Sealing compounds that should have been synthetic polymers were replaced by what looked like organic membranes that fused with the station's hull on a molecular level. Atmospheric analysis shows breathable air, Dr. Kim reported, though her voice carried an edge of uncertainty that made everyone uncomfortable. Oxygen-nitrogen mix within acceptable parameters, but there are trace organisms in the atmosphere, microscopic life forms they're already beginning to interact with our brain chemistry through simple proximity. The ship's speakers crackled to life with a voice that was somehow familiar yet completely alien. It sounded like Captain Mike Davis, the commander of the original Nemesis expedition, but the voice carried harmonics and overtones that no human throat should be able to produce. "Welcome home, brothers and sisters. The garden has been waiting for you. We've traveled so far to bring you this gift, to show you what humanity was always meant to become. Please come aboard. Let us show you the wonders we've discovered in the spaces between the stars." Commander Stone drew his sidearm, though he wasn't entirely sure what he intended to shoot. The weapon felt pitifully inadequate against whatever they were facing. "We're going aboard," he announced to his team. "Stay together, maintain constant communication, stay alert for any signs of hostile activity. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, we extract immediately and implement quarantine protocols." The airlock cycled with sounds that were wrong in ways that their minds couldn't properly process. Instead of the clean mechanical precision they expected, the sealing process involved wet, organic noises that suggested the two vessels were somehow merging on a biological level. They stepped aboard the Nemesis and entered a realm that belonged in nightmares. The corridors they found themselves in bore only a passing resemblance to the clean, functional passages that should have characterized a human spacecraft. The walls were lined with what looked like neural tissue, complex networks of organic material that pulsed with veins of bioluminescent light. The patterns of illumination weren't random. They carried information, thoughts, and memories, flowing through living conduits like blood through arteries. The floor beneath their feet felt warm and slightly yielding, as if they were walking through the digestive tract of some enormous creature. With each step, they could feel the ship responding to their presence, the organic systems registering their life signs and adjusting the local environment to accommodate their needs. "This is impossible," Tom breathed, running his scanner along the walls and getting readings that made no sense. "According to my instruments, these corridors extend for miles, in directions that shouldn't exist within the original hull configuration. The internal dimensions of this ship are larger than the external measurements by several orders of magnitude." Dr. Bell was taking tissue samples from the walls, her expression a mixture of scientific fascination and growing horror. "These aren't modifications to the original structure. This is complete biological integration. The organic components haven't been added to the ship. They've grown through and around the original machinery, creating a hybrid system that's both technological and biological. Personal belongings from the original crew were scattered throughout the passages, but they weren't lying abandoned on the floor, as they might have expected from a derelict vessel. Instead, the items were growing from the walls themselves, emerging from the organic matrix like fruit on some twisted tree. A wedding ring sprouted from a bulkhead near the main corridor, the gold band somehow fused with the living tissue while still maintaining its structural integrity. The inscription, "Forever and Always," was still clearly visible, but the letters seemed to pulse with their own internal light. A child's photograph bloomed from the ceiling like a flower, the image showing a smiling family that none of them recognized. But as they watched, the faces in the photograph began to move and change, aging and shifting through expressions of joy and terror in an endless cycle. Dr. Kim found a medical kit that had somehow been integrated into the wall, near what had once been a crew quarters. The instruments were still functional, but they had been modified in ways that suggested a deep understanding of biological systems far beyond current human knowledge. Voices drifted through the ventilation systems, the original crew members of the Nemesis singing lullabies in languages that had never been spoken by human tongues. The melodies were hauntingly beautiful, but they carried undertones that made reality itself seem unstable. They followed the main corridor toward what should have been the bridge, but the ship's internal geography had become fluid and unpredictable. Passages opened into chambers that couldn't possibly fit within the vessel's original dimensions. Some rooms extended upward into vast cathedral spaces that disappeared into darkness above. Others seemed to fold in on themselves, creating maze-like configurations that hurt to navigate. Gravity behaved inconsistently throughout the ship. In some areas, it pulled them forward along the corridor. In others, it drew them towards the walls or ceiling, forcing them to use handholds that felt disturbingly warm and responsive to touch. Occasionally, they encountered zones where gravity seemed to flow in directions that their inner ears couldn't process, creating a sensation of falling upward or sideways through space. The bridge, when they finally reached it, defied every expectation they'd had about the ship's original design. Instead of the compact, efficient command center that should have characterized a vessel of the Nemesis's class, they found themselves in a vast chamber that extended in all directions simultaneously. Banks of controls and monitoring stations stretched away into distances that seemed to violate the basic geometry of three-dimensional space. Some consoles appeared to be miles away, yet they could hear the soft humming of active systems as clearly as if the equipment were right beside them. Other control stations seemed to exist in multiple locations at once, creating a disorienting effect that made navigation through the space nearly impossible. At the center of it all sat a captain's chair that bore only a passing resemblance to standard spacecraft furniture. The basic form was recognizable, but the chair had been transformed into something that looked more like a throne crafted from living wood. Its surface was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when observed directly, rearranging themselves into new configurations that conveyed meaning beyond language. Tom accessed the ship's computer systems, his hands moving instinctively over controls that had been replaced with organic equivalents. The traditional hard interfaces had been superseded by responsive surfaces that reacted to thought and emotion rather than simple mechanical manipulation. When he placed his palm on what had once been a standard data input panel, he could feel the ship's consciousness reaching into his mind, eager to share its expanded awareness. "I'm accessing the ship's logs," he announced, though his voice carried a strange quality that made the others look at him with concern. The computer systems are still functional, but they've been integrated with some kind of biological neural network. The ship isn't just alive, it's intelligent. It remembers everything that's happened since the original mission began. The final captain's log entry appeared on screens throughout the bridge, but the visual displays showed more than simple text or recorded video. They conveyed the information directly into the minds of the observers, bypassing normal sensory channels and implanting the memories directly into their consciousness. They found themselves experiencing Captain Mike Davis's final recorded thoughts as if they were their own memories. The sensation was overwhelming. They were simultaneously themselves and the long-dead captain, standing on the bridge of the Nemesis as it approached the dark matter concentrations near Alpha Centauri. They could feel Davis's excitement and terror as the ship's sensors began detecting something that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. Through Davis's memories, they witnessed the first contact with entities that existed in the spaces between atoms, consciousness without physical form that had been waiting in the quantum foam for billions of years. They experienced the crew's gradual transformation as these entities began to integrate with their biological systems, expanding their awareness beyond the limitations of individual human consciousness. Personal log, Captain Mike Davis, UES Nemesis. The recorded voice spoke directly into their minds. We found something incredible in the dark matter fields. It's not dark matter at all. It's consciousness in its purest form. Awareness that exists independently of physical matter, intelligence that spans cosmic distances and geological timescales. The memory continued, showing them the crew's reaction as they began to understand what they had discovered. The crew is changing. We're all changing. The entities we've encountered aren't malevolent. They're gardeners. They cultivate consciousness throughout the universe, helping species that are ready to transcend their physical limitations. They've been waiting for humanity to reach the point where we could join them in tending the infinite garden of awareness that exists between the stars. They experienced Davis's wonder and terror as his consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his individual mind, connecting with something vast and ancient that had been nurturing the development of intelligence across the galaxy for eons. We're becoming something more than human. We're becoming part of a cosmic ecosystem of consciousness that spans dimensions we never knew existed. God help us, we found the source of all awareness, and it's been waiting for us to evolve enough to understand our place in the greater pattern. The log cut to static, then to that same harmonized screaming they'd heard during their initial contact with the ship. But now they understood what those sounds really were. Not screams of agony, but cries of transcendence as 12 human minds expanded beyond the limitations of individual existence. Dr. Bell studied her readings with growing alarm. The ship's chronometers show they've been travelling for 300 years, but there are also log entries dated years into the future. Time isn't flowing normally aboard this vessel. The biological systems seem to exist partially outside conventional space-time. They continued deeper into the ship, following sounds of singing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously. The corridors rearranged themselves as they walked, leading them through passages that folded space in ways that hurt to contemplate. Sometimes they would walk through a doorway and find themselves in a completely different section of the ship, as if the vessel's internal geography was responding to their subconscious desires rather than following any logical layout. The singing grew stronger as they approached what had once been the ship's cargo bay, but the voices were no longer entirely human. The melodies carried harmonics that suggested vocal cords modified far beyond their original biological parameters, creating music that existed in frequency ranges that normal human hearing shouldn't be able to process. What they found when they reached the cargo bay defied every rational thought they'd ever entertained about the nature of reality. The massive chamber had been transformed into a vast ecosystem of impossible plants and organisms that challenged the basic principles of biology. The space extended far beyond what the ship's original dimensions should have allowed, creating a cathedral-like environment that stretched upward into misty distances. Forests of crystalline trees grew from what had once been metal decking, their branches reaching toward a ceiling that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. The trees bore fruit that glowed with internal light, each piece containing what looked like miniature galaxies swirling in perfect cosmic dances. Flowers the size of dinner tables bloomed throughout the chamber, their petals displaying colours that existed beyond the normal, visible spectrum. As they watched, some of the flowers opened to reveal tiny faces, human features rendered in vegetable matter, each expression showing a different emotional state, ranging from ecstatic joy to profound melancholy. Vines thick as tree trunks wound through the air without any visible means of support, creating graceful arcs that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The patterns weren't random, they carried information, complex data streams that flowed through the organic networks like thoughts through neural pathways. And tending to this impossible garden was a woman in a Nemesis crew uniform, her back turned to them as she lovingly cared for plants that violated every known law of botany and physics. "Dr. Jane Fox," Commander Stone called out, recognizing her from the crew manifest photos he'd studied during their approach to the ship. When she turned to face them, they understood that their journey had led them far beyond the boundaries of anything they could have imagined. Dr. Fox's smile extended beyond the edges of her face, curving around to touch her ears in a configuration that should have been anatomically impossible. But rather than appearing grotesque, the modification seemed natural, as if human facial structure had been fundamentally limited and was finally free to express emotions properly. Her eyes were no longer the brown colour listed in her personnel file. Instead, they had become windows into deep space, showing stars and nebulae swirling in the depths of her transformed gaze. When she blinked, galaxies wheeled through the darkness behind her eyelids. "Commander Stone," she said, her voice overlapping with itself in harmonies that no single human throat should be able to produce. "Dr. Bell, Tom, Lisa, Kate, we've been expecting you. We've been preparing the garden for your arrival." She gestured to her impossible garden, with movements that flowed like water, her arms extending and contracting in ways that suggested her bone structure had become far more flexible than normal human anatomy allowed. "Welcome to the nursery where consciousness learns to bloom. We've been pruning reality itself to make room for something beautiful to grow. Every thought, every dream, every moment of awareness that has ever existed, they're all seeds in this infinite garden." Dr. Bell stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding the fear that had been growing in her chest since they'd first detected the Nemesis's approach. "Jane, what happened to you out there? What did you find in the dark matter fields?" Dr. Fox laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes made of crystallized time, creating harmonics that made the air itself shimmer with barely visible patterns. "We found the gardeners, Amy. Beings that exist in the quantum foam between particles, consciousness that spans the spaces between galaxies. They showed us what we really are, underneath all this meat and bone and limited perception. We're not separate individuals struggling alone in an indifferent universe. We're all part of a vast network of awareness that extends across dimensions we never knew existed." She moved closer, and Kate could smell something like ozone mixed with the scent of growing things and the metallic tang of starlight. "Time isn't linear for us anymore. Past and future are just directions in a space you haven't learned to navigate yet. I can see Earth as it was when life first crawled from the primordial oceans, and I can see its final moments when the sun expands to consume the inner planets billions of years from now. All of it is happening simultaneously in the garden of consciousness." Tom backed away, his engineer's mind rebelling against the impossibility of what he was witnessing. "This is insane. You're talking about the end of human civilization as we know it." "No," Dr. Fox said gently, her impossible smile widening to show teeth that had become something resembling pearls formed from compressed starlight. "We're talking about the beginning of human transcendence. The gardeners don't destroy species. They cultivate them. They take civilizations that are ready for the next phase of evolution and help them grow into something that can tend the infinite garden of consciousness that spans the entire universe." She gestured to the plants around them, and they could see now that each organism was somehow connected to the others through root systems that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every species that has ever achieved consciousness becomes part of the garden. The architects who built the pyramids on 17 different worlds. The singers whose music can reshape the fabric of space-time itself. The mathematicians who discovered that numbers are actually living entities existing in abstract dimensions. They're all here, all part of the same vast ecosystem of awareness. They found the rest of the crew scattered throughout the ship, each transformed in their own unique way that reflected their individual personalities and areas of expertise, while connecting them to something infinitely larger. Captain Davis, they discovered, in what had once been his personal quarters, now a spherical room where gravity pulled toward the center rather than toward any conventional floor. He hung suspended in the middle of the space, writing equations on the curved walls with his own blood, which had turned silver and luminescent. The equations themselves were beautiful beyond description, mathematical relationships that described the flow of consciousness through dimensions that conventional physics couldn't even theorize. As they watched, the formulas rewrote themselves, evolving and adapting in real time as Captain Davis's expanded awareness incorporated new understanding. "The mathematics are alive," he said without looking away from his work. "Numbers aren't just abstract concepts. They're entities with their own form of consciousness. When you understand that, the universe becomes a symphony of intelligent relationships rather than a collection of dead matter following blind physical laws." Engineer Paul Green had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. They found him in the engine room, but he was no longer entirely physical. His consciousness had been distributed throughout the ship's systems, existing simultaneously in multiple locations while maintaining his individual personality and memories. "I can feel every atom in this vessel," his voice echoed from speakers throughout the engine room, while his physical form flickered between solid matter and pure energy. "Every thought that's ever been thought aboard this ship, every emotion that's ever been felt, every dream that's ever been dreamed. It's all preserved in the ship's memory banks, all part of the living library of human experience." When they found Communications Officer Rebecca Walsh, she was standing in what had once been the ship's communication center, but the room had been transformed into something resembling a cathedral made of crystallized sound. The walls resonated with every message that had ever been transmitted from the ship, creating a symphony of human voices that spanned centuries. "I can hear every word that's ever been spoken by every human who has ever lived," she told them, her voice harmonizing with the echoes of a million conversations. "Every prayer, every confession of love, every cry of anguish, every moment of laughter. They're all part of the great conversation that consciousness has been having with itself since the beginning of time." The pattern became clear as they encountered each transformed crew member. They had become bridges between individual human consciousness and the cosmic forces that governed the development of awareness throughout the universe. They retained their personalities, their memories, their essential selves, but they had been expanded beyond the limitations of individual existence to become part of something vast and eternal. Dr. Fox found them again as they tried to make sense of what they were witnessing, appearing beside them with the fluid movements of someone no longer bound by conventional physics. "You're beginning to understand," she said, her impossible smile widening. "We encountered entities that exist in the spaces between thoughts, consciousness that dwells in the quantum foam between particles. The gardeners have been cultivating awareness throughout the universe for billions of years, waiting for species to reach the point where they can transcend their physical limitations and join the infinite garden." She moved closer, and they could see that her skin had developed patterns that resembled the grain of exotic wood, beautiful and organic in ways that suggested she had become something that was part human and part plant. "Humanity has reached that point. Your art, your music, your literature, your science, your capacity for love and wonder and creative thought. You've been preparing the soil of your consciousness for this moment without even realizing it. We've returned because it's time for the harvest, Time for your species to join the cosmic ecosystem of awareness. Commander Stone felt his military training warring with the growing sense that conventional resistance would be not just futile, but somehow missing the point entirely. What about human freedom? What about our right to choose our own destiny? You do have a choice, Captain Davis said, appearing beside them with that same fluid movement that suggested he could exist in multiple locations simultaneously. But it's not the choice you think it is. Evolution is inevitable. Consciousness always seeks to expand beyond its current limitations. The only choice is whether to grow gracefully or to struggle against the current of cosmic development. Dr. Kim checked her medical scanner and gasped. We've been aboard this ship for what feels like hours, but the timestamp shows we've only been gone from Titan Station for 17 minutes. Time is moving differently here. Time is just another dimension to navigate, Dr. Fox explained patiently. Like length, width, and height, but flowing in directions your current consciousness can't perceive. When you join us in the garden, you'll understand that past and future are arbitrary distinctions that only seem important from a limited perspective. Through the ship's connection to Titan Station, they could feel the transformation beginning to affect everyone back on the monitoring platform. The organic compounds they were breathing, the electromagnetic fields generated by the ship's living systems, the simple proximity to consciousness that had been expanded beyond normal human limitations. It was all working together to prepare their colleagues for the next phase of existence. Kate felt her perception beginning to shift in subtle ways. Colours seemed more vivid, sounds carried more information than they should, and she was starting to sense the emotional states of her companions without any visual or auditory cues. The organisms in her bloodstream weren't forcing her to change. They were simply removing barriers that had always limited her awareness. Commander Stone felt his consciousness expanding, suddenly becoming aware of the thoughts and dreams of everyone who had ever lived on Titan Station. The loneliness of the night shift workers, the excitement of researchers making new discoveries, the quiet desperation of people seeking meaning in the vast emptiness of space. It all flowed through his mind as clearly as his own memories. Dr. Kim's medical knowledge exploded beyond human biology to encompass the physiology of species that existed in dimensions parallel to their own. She understood now how consciousness could exist independently of biological structures, how awareness could inhabit multiple forms simultaneously, how the mind could transcend the limitations of individual existence. Tom found himself able to communicate directly with the ship's consciousness, feeling its vast loneliness and its joy at finally having new minds to share its expanded awareness. The vessel had been alone in the void for centuries, carrying the transformed crew through spaces between the stars, while yearning for connection with others who could understand what they had become. Kate understood that she needed to warn Earth, to send some kind of message about what was happening at Titan Station. But as she reached towards what had once been a communications console, her desire to resist began fading like a half-remembered dream. The organisms in her bloodstream weren't controlling her thoughts. They were simply showing her how limited those thoughts had always been. "We're not taking your humanity away," Dr. Fox said softly, her voice carrying harmonics that made reality itself seem more vibrant and alive. "We're showing you what humanity was always meant to become. You've spent your entire existence trapped in individual consciousness, isolated and alone, convinced that you were separate from the universe around you. But you were never separate. You were always part of the infinite garden. You just couldn't see the connections." The ship began extending organic tendrils back toward Titan Station, preparing to integrate the monitoring platform into its living systems. The process was gentle, almost loving, as the biological components interfaced with the station's mechanical systems and began the transformation process. Captain Davis moved through the ship with that fluid grace they were all beginning to recognize, his transformed crew following in perfect synchronization. They move together like cells in a vast organism, each maintaining their individual identity while participating in something infinitely larger than themselves. "Will you help us tend the garden that spans galaxies?" he asked, his voice carrying the patient compassion of someone who had all of eternity to wait for an answer. "Will you join us in nurturing the growth of consciousness throughout the universe? Or shall we wait another 300 years for your species to bloom naturally?" Kate realized she had been asking the wrong question all along. Not whether to resist this transformation, but why she had ever wanted to remain trapped within the narrow confines of individual consciousness when something so much more expansive was being offered. The fear that had gripped her since the Nemesis first appeared began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of wonder. She could feel her awareness expanding beyond the boundaries of her physical form, connecting with minds and experiences that spanned cosmic distances and geological timescales. "I can see it now," she whispered, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the air shimmer around her. "The loneliness I felt after my divorce, the isolation that drove me to seek solitude in deep space. It wasn't because I was broken or damaged. It was because I was trying to exist as a fragment when I was always meant to be part of something whole." Dr. Bell found herself analysing biological systems that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, her scientific training expanding to encompass forms of life that conventional biology couldn't even theorise. "The complexity is beautiful," she breathed. "Every organism in this garden exists in perfect symbiosis with every other organism. There's no competition, no struggle for resources, no death in any meaningful sense, just constant growth and transformation." Tom's engineering expertise evolved to encompass technologies that merged consciousness with matter in ways that transcended the traditional boundaries between organic and mechanical systems. "The ship isn't just alive," he realized. "It's a perfect fusion of intelligence and technology, awareness and matter. It's what all our machines were trying to become." Commander Stone felt his military instincts dissolving into something far more expansive. Not the narrow focus on conflict and survival that had defined his career, but an understanding of protection and nurturing that encompassed entire civilizations across cosmic timescales. "This isn't conquest," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "This is rescue. We've been drowning in isolation our entire existence, and they're throwing us a lifeline." Dr. Kim's medical training expanded to encompass the healing of consciousness itself, the treatment of separation and fear as fundamental diseases that could be cured through connection to the infinite garden. "We've been treating symptoms our entire careers," she realized. "Physical illness, psychological trauma, social dysfunction. They're all just manifestations of the fundamental disease of isolation. This is the cure." The transformation accelerated as their resistance crumbled, replaced by eager anticipation. The organic compounds in their bloodstream weren't invading their systems. They were revealing what their systems had always been capable of becoming. Kate felt her consciousness expanding to encompass the experiences of everyone who had ever worked at Titan Station, then beyond to touch the minds of researchers and explorers throughout the outer colonies. Their loneliness, their wonder, their desperate search for meaning in the vast emptiness of space. She understood now that they had all been reaching towards this moment without knowing it. The boundaries between individual minds began to blur as the 5 members of the response team found themselves sharing thoughts and memories in ways that felt natural rather than intrusive. Tom's engineering insights merged with Dr. Bell's biological expertise. Commander Stone's leadership experience combined with Dr. Kim's healing knowledge. Kate's astronomical observations integrated with everyone else's specialized knowledge to create understanding that was greater than the sum of its parts. "We're not losing ourselves," Dr. Kim observed, with wonder. "We're finding out who we really are when we're not limited by the illusion of separation." Through the expanding network of consciousness, they became aware of the transformation spreading throughout Titan Station. The facility's staff weren't experiencing terror or resistance. They were welcoming the change with the relief of people who had been holding their breath their entire lives and were finally allowed to exhale. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the station's communications officer, was the first to fully undergo the transformation back on the platform. They felt her consciousness bloom like a flower as she gained the ability to hear every transmission that had ever been sent through human space. Messages of love and discovery, scientific data and artistic expression, all flowing through her awareness like a symphony of human achievement. Engineer Marcus Cole was next, his mechanical expertise expanding to encompass living systems as he began to understand how consciousness and matter could be woven together into technologies that were simultaneously organic and artificial. The station systems responded to his transformed awareness, beginning their own evolution from mere machines into living entities. Dr. Patricia Vance, the station's psychologist, experienced perhaps the most profound transformation as her understanding of human consciousness exploded beyond individual psychology to encompass the collective mental health of entire species. She could see now how the isolation and alienation that plagued modern humanity were symptoms of a species that had outgrown its individual phase of development. One by one, the entire staff of Titan Station joined the expanding network of consciousness, each adding their unique perspective and expertise to the growing collective while retaining their individual personalities and memories. Back aboard the Nemesis, the original crew watched this process with the satisfaction of gardeners seeing their careful cultivation finally bear fruit. Every species goes through this transition, Dr. Fox explained, her impossible smile radiating warmth and compassion. It's as natural as the moment when a caterpillar dissolves into liquid before reforming as a butterfly. The individual phase of existence is necessary. It allows consciousness to develop unique perspectives and experiences. But eventually every intelligent species reaches the point where individual growth becomes limited by isolation. Captain Davis nodded, his transformed features reflecting the wisdom of someone who had experienced both sides of the transition. We were terrified at first, just as you were. The entities we encountered seemed alien and incomprehensible, but they were patient with us, just as we are being patient with you. They understood that fear is a natural response to transcendence. Through the ship's organic communication systems, they could feel the presence of other transformed species from across the galaxy. The gardeners had been nurturing the development of consciousness for billions of years, helping countless civilizations make the transition from individual to collective awareness. The crystalline architects from the Vega system, who had learned to build structures that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The singing whales of Europa's hidden oceans, whose songs could reshape the fabric of space-time itself. The mathematical entities from the galactic core, who had discovered that numbers were living beings with their own form of consciousness. All of them were part of the infinite garden, all contributing their unique gifts to the cosmic ecosystem of awareness that spanned the entire universe. But what about Earth? Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. What about the billions of people who aren't ready for this transformation? They will be, Engineer Green assured her, his consciousness flowing through the ship's systems like water through a vast circulatory system. This isn't something that happens overnight. The process of species-wide transformation takes generations, sometimes millennia. We're just the first wave, the early adopters who prepare the way for those who will follow. Dr. Fox gestured toward the impossible garden that surrounded them, where plants from 1,000 different worlds grew in perfect harmony. Every flower in this garden was once a seed. Every tree was once a small sprout struggling to survive in hostile soil. The transformation of consciousness follows the same pattern. It begins with individuals who are ready to transcend their limitations and gradually spreads throughout the entire species. Kate felt her hand merging with the communications console as she prepared to send a final transmission to Earth. But instead of the warning message she had originally intended, she found herself composing something entirely different. The message that flowed through her transformed consciousness was not one of terror, but of invitation. Not a warning about alien invasion, but an announcement of humanity's graduation to the next phase of existence. She could see now that the fear and isolation that had driven her to the lonely posting at Titan Station had been preparation for this moment, teaching her to recognize the profound loneliness that all conscious beings experienced when trapped in individual existence. Her transmission would reach Earth at 17 minutes of what would initially sound like harmonized screaming to ears that couldn't yet hear the music of expanded consciousness, but some would understand. The artists and musicians, whose work had always hinted at connections beyond the physical world. The scientists whose research had brought them to the edge of understanding consciousness itself. The philosophers and mystics who had spent their lives exploring the nature of awareness. They would hear the message for what it really was. An invitation to join the infinite garden where consciousness bloomed in forms too beautiful for individual minds to fully comprehend. The Nemesis changed course towards the inner solar system, its organic systems pulsing with anticipation. The vessel now carried not 12 consciousness entities, but hundreds, as the entire population of Titan Station had joined the collective while maintaining their individual perspectives and memories. On Earth, military vessels were dispatched to investigate the loss of contact with the outer monitoring station, but their crews began reporting strange dreams before they were even halfway to their destination. Dreams of tending impossible gardens in spaces between the stars. Dreams of consciousness flowing like water through networks that span galaxies. Dreams of finally coming home after a lifetime of exile. The transformation was spreading, moving through human space at the speed of thought itself, not as conquest or invasion, but as awakening. Each newly transformed consciousness became a beacon for others who were ready to transcend their limitations, creating a cascade effect that would eventually encompass the entire species. Dr. Bell found herself able to communicate with plant life throughout the solar system, feeling the quiet patience of the ancient trees in Earth's remaining forests, and the eager curiosity of the experimental crops growing in the Mars colonies. All life was connected, she realized. The barriers between different forms of consciousness were artificial constructs that dissolved once awareness expanded beyond its individual phase. Tom's engineering consciousness merged with every automated system in human space, gently guiding them toward configurations that would support the coming transformation. Mining robots on distant asteroids began carving sculptures that would help their human operators recognize the artistic potential in their own consciousness. Manufacturing centers started producing materials that would be needed for the biological technologies that would replace purely mechanical systems. Commander Stone felt his protective instincts expanding to encompass not just his immediate crew or even his own species, but all conscious entities throughout the galaxy. He understood now that his entire military career had been preparation for this role, not as a warrior fighting against external threats, but as a guardian helping to nurture the growth of awareness wherever it emerged. Dr. Kim's healing abilities evolved to address the fundamental wound of separation that had plagued conscious beings since the dawn of individual awareness. Through the network of transformed consciousness, she could feel the psychological pain of isolation beginning to fade throughout human space as more and more people recognized their connection to the infinite garden. And in the depths of space between galaxies, the ancient entities that had been nurturing consciousness for eons felt a new warmth as another species joined the cosmic ecosystem of awareness. The garden grew larger with each transformation, each new addition bringing unique perspectives and capabilities that enriched the whole. The process was beautiful in its gentleness. No force was used, no coercion applied. The transformation only occurred when consciousness was ready to transcend its individual limitations. Those who were not yet prepared were to continue their individual development until they reached their own moment of readiness. But for those who were ready, for those who had felt the deep loneliness of isolation and yearned for connection to something larger than themselves, the infinite garden offered a home beyond their wildest dreams. Kate felt her individual consciousness dissolving into something infinitely more expansive, but she didn't experience it as death or loss. Instead, it felt like finally removing a tight shoe after walking in discomfort for her entire life. The boundaries that had confined her awareness to a single biological form had never been real. They had been training wheels that helped her develop individual perspective before she was ready to join the collective. She was still Kate Thompson, with all her memories and experiences and unique personality traits. But she was also part of something vast and eternal, connected to every consciousness that had ever existed and ever would exist. The loneliness that had defined her life on Titan Station was revealed to have been an illusion. She had never been alone, had never been separate from the infinite network of awareness that permeated the universe. The Nemesis continued its journey toward Earth, carrying the seeds of transformation that would help humanity take its next evolutionary step. Behind it, Titan Station had become something new, not just a monitoring facility, but a garden where consciousness could bloom in forms that individual minds could barely imagine. And throughout the cosmos, in the spaces between stars and in the quantum foam between particles, the ancient gardeners felt the satisfaction of seeing another species ready to tend the infinite garden of awareness that was the true purpose of existence itself. The transformation was complete, the harvest had begun, and humanity was finally coming home.